So this is section 10.3. We're finally going to get into something that might be a little bit new and different for you. I guess all of this really has been. I'm not sure, you may have done a little bit of this in geometry. So let's start with a refresher. Remember, you always have to remember how to tell if the equation is a parabola, circle, ellipse, hyperbola, or what. And I think that's kind of a standardized test question as well. So it's something to kind of file away and keep in mind. So let's see. Maybe since we've done this enough times, here's your reminder. Parabola, remember, has one squared term, right? These we know all both have two squares. But see if you can remember the difference between a circle versus an ellipse versus a hyperbola. So my suggestion is, why don't you go ahead and try to label those, see if you remember. Maybe pause the video and then see how you do. That's the best way to make sure you understand and you remember. I think I will mention on the circle, you'll notice that here's your square terms. So they don't have to be right next to each other like these up here are right next to each other, right? You have a regular x term in the middle. So you have like an 8x in the middle and a 2y, and that's fine. Those don't affect me deciding whether it's a circle or a parabola or a hyperbola. Remember, it's all about the square terms. It doesn't matter where the squared terms are in the equation. Okay, and then I'll just finish out. Number 6 would be parabola. And it looks like number 7 is also a circle. Okay. So let's talk about how do we graph a circle. Well, you may remember from geometry, there's two things that kind of determine what the circle looks like. The center and the radius. So the center of the circle is going to tell me where to graph it, and the radius is going to tell me how big to graph it. Okay, so the standard form, I know it's going to seem strange, looks like this. All right. There's my letters. X minus h squared, y minus k squared equals r squared. So the variables are the x and the y. Okay, that's your x and your y. And notice they're both in a parenthesis squared because a circle has two squared terms. The h, the k, and the r tell us information about the center and radius. All right, so the h and the k, the h and the k tell us the center of the circle. So the center of the circle is the ordered pair HK. And then the R, I bet you have already guessed it, the R over here tells me the radius. Now notice that it's an R squared and the radius is just R. So if that number over there is a 4, then the radius is 2. If that number over there is a 9, then we know the radius is 3. If this number is a 25, then we know the radius is 5. So something to kind of keep in mind. Okay, the other thing for the center, you'll notice up here in the equation, the standard form of the equation has this as x minus that number and y minus that number. And it doesn't have to be a minus, it could be a plus. But notice when I wrote the center down here is an ordered pair, it was just h and just k, meaning that in order to know what that number is, you're going to put the opposite. So let me kind of show you what I'm talking about. If I have the equation, let's say I have for this equation x minus 2 squared plus y minus 3 squared equals, let's say, 9. Yeah, we'll say 9. Okay, so according to this, the center is the h and the k, but like I said, you take the opposite. So if that says x minus 2, then the center is going to be positive 2. And if that has y minus 3, then the center has a y coordinate of positive 3. So that's what I mean by the opposite. So the center is at 2, 3, 2, 3. That's the center of my circle. And then I know that this 9 represents the r squared, so that means the r is the square root of that, so the r is 3. So let's think about this. Remember, the radius is the distance from the center to the outside of the circle. So I could say from that center, I'm going to go 3 units this direction, but that means I'm going to go 3 units in every direction. Now, all I really need is maybe to put kind of 4 points out here. So we'll say 3 to the right, 3 up, 3 to the left, and 3 down. So those would form my circle. Okay, try and see if you can actually draw it circular and not all squared off. I find that I do a much better job. Hey, that's not too bad. If I just kind of draw it a little bit faster, if I go too slow, it gets all kinds of wonky. Okay. Let's try another example. Let's say on this one, I have the equation x plus 1 squared plus y minus 2 squared equals, let's do this, equals 1. Okay, so the center, remember, is the numbers in the parentheses. So the center, and it's the opposite. So the center is going to be at -1, comma, positive 2, right? I'm taking the opposite of the sign. So -1, positive 2 is my center. And then remember, this number over here is the r squared. So r is the square root of that. Well, in this case, isn't the square root of 1 still 1? So my radius is just 1. So I'm going to go 1 unit in every direction. And I'm going to have this cute little circle. So the center shows me where on the graph it goes. And the radius just tells me how big that circle is. Okay, so there's not much to circles. I think they're kind of fun to graph. So you'll notice in the homework, again, we're classifying because I don't ever want you to forget that. And then you just have a couple examples here of graphing circles. Now, when you get down to number 6, 7, and 8, these are kind of questions you have to think about. I will mention a couple of the words just to kind of help remind you. So number 6 says to write the equation of the circle. So keep in mind the standard form is x minus h squared y minus k squared equals r squared. So if you just know the center and the radius, you can fill in. In this case, they give you the center. They don't give you the radius, they give you the diameter. So think about the difference between the diameter and the radius and see if that helps you with that one. Okay, again, on number 7, they don't give you the center. They just say the endpoints of the diameter are this. So let me just kind of show you with this picture over here that we did a minute ago. So on these that we drew a minute ago, if I know on this one, for example, that we said the radius was 3, remember the diameter is all the way across, right? So the diameter there would be 6. And if I talk about the endpoints of the diameter, I'm saying this and this. So if I know the diameter, I could always find the center because it's going to be kind of right in the middle. And I'll also be able to find the radius to, just by determining the distance from the center to the outside of the circle. So I say these are thinking questions, but they're not that bad. Don't just look at them and see the words and quit on me. Okay, so just try those. And that is everything you never wanted to know about circles.